Inside America's most dangerous prisons. The dark realities of Angola and Attica. This documentary explores the violent histories and evolving realities of two of the most notorious prisons in the United States, Louisiana State Penitentiary, Angola, and Attica Correctional Facility in New York. Drawing from publicly available records, investigative journalism, court filings, and historical reports, we'll examine the brutality, uprisings, legacy of forced labor, and the decades-long struggle over human rights behind their walls. Disclaimer. This story is a dramatized adaptation inspired by real events. Some names, places, and details have been changed for privacy. The land of no return. They say you can feel Angola long before you ever see it. Long before you catch your first glimpse of its razor-wire horizons or smell the heavy Louisiana heat drifting across the open fields. Long before the gun towers rise into view like unmoving sentries from another century. People who've done time there swear the place has a pulse, a slow, steady, unwelcoming rhythm that gets into your bones. The kind of rhythm that reminds you that escape isn't a plan. It's a fantasy. The official name is the Louisiana State Penitentiary, according to state records. But hardly anyone calls it that. Most people, inmates, guards, investigators, journalists, they call it something else, Angola. Named after the plantation that once covered the same land. A plantation worked by enslaved Africans taken from the region formerly known as Angola, according to historical reports. And if you talk to people familiar with its history, they'll tell you the prison's name wasn't the only thing that carried over. Not entirely. Here's the hook, the detail that stops people cold. Angola is the largest maximum security prison in the United States, the size of a small town, surrounded on three sides by the Mississippi River, and on all sides by the past. It houses more than 5,000 men, the vast majority serving life sentences, according to state corrections data. And for decades, investigations and court filings have described conditions inside as some of the harshest in the country. But that's the thing about Angola. For all its reputation, most people only know pieces of it. A riot here. A lawsuit there. A documentary they half remember from late-night TV. So if we're going to talk about Angola, really talk about it, we need to start at the beginning. Not the official, polished version you'd read in a brochure. Not the myths whispered between inmates in the yard. But the version that sits somewhere in the middle, in the gray space where truth and survival instincts intertwine. Because Angola isn't just a prison. It's a story. A long one. A heavy one. And depending on who you ask, it's a warning. The arrival. The bus always came early. According to former inmates interviewed in various news reports, it usually pulled in just after sunrise, when the fields were still soaked with dew and the fog clung low across the grass. The windows didn't open. The air inside was stale. The cuffs were tight. And the men sat in silence, some resigned, some terrified, some staring straight ahead as if eye contact might betray them. This is where we meet our composite narrator, Marcus, a pseudonym used to protect privacy. He isn't one real man, he's a blend of experiences pulled from interviews, testimonies, and public accounts. He's here to give voice to the dozens, maybe hundreds, whose stories overlap in strikingly similar ways. Marcus's story begins with the rattle of the bus engine and the face of the guard who stepped on board holding a clipboard. According to Marcus, the guard didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't do anything dramatic. He didn't have to. Instead, the guard simply said, "Welcome to Angola. This is where you live now." There were no comforting words. No soft transitions. No hint that life here might ever be manageable. Just a statement, blunt, absolute, and final. As the bus rolled through the prison gates, Marcus said the first thing he noticed wasn't the guard towers or the metal detectors or the long rows of dormitory units. It was the farmland. Miles of it. Sprawling, open fields stretching farther than the eye could see. That's when he realized the truth. This place wasn't meant to be escaped. It was meant to absorb you. A prison built on a plantation. According to historical documents and multiple news investigations, Angola has been described as the closest thing to a modern penal plantation that still exists in America. The state owns the property, roughly 18,000 acres, and much of it is cultivated by inmate labor. The prison grows crops, raises cattle, and sells products through the state, all documented in public records. Marcus didn't know that his first day. But he could feel the history in the air. The fields. The heat. The quiet. It all sent a message before a single officer opened their mouth. One historian called it a prison built on top of its own ghost, referring to the thousands of enslaved people who worked this land long before razor wire was ever installed. According to reports from the 20th century, early versions of Angola operated almost identically to a slave plantation. Prisoners labored under armed guards on horseback, picking cotton and cutting sugarcane under the threat of whippings and gunfire. Over time, the whips were outlawed. But the horses stayed. So did the fields. So did the system. State officials have long argued that inmate labor serves a rehabilitative purpose and reduces costs, and all labor programs are regulated under modern corrections law. But former inmates interviewed by journalists described the labor as non-negotiable, with some claiming they were punished for refusing to work, allegations the state has denied or disputed in the past. What's undeniable, according to public records, is that Angola's labor program remains one of the largest in the country. And it is a defining part of life there. Marcus learned that his very first week. The red hats and the echoes of the past. Angola once had a notorious work crew known as the Red Hats, named for the bright caps they were forced to wear as they marched to the fields. According to the Louisiana State Museum and historical reporting, they were known for brutal working conditions and widely condemned by civil rights groups. The Red Hats formally ended decades ago, but the nickname lived on in the prison's oral history. Marcus met an older inmate, a man whose real identity we cannot confirm, so we'll call him Reynolds, a composite name. Reynolds claimed to have lived through the final years of the old system before reforms began to take place, according to various oversight reports. Reynolds told Marcus, "They don't need the Red Hats anymore. They just got new names for things now." He didn't elaborate. He didn't have to. Some things at Angola had changed over the years, legally, structurally, politically, but the culture, according to many accounts, remained slow to shift. And that's important, because the story of Angola isn't just a story of brutality. It's a story of inertia. A system so massive, so isolated, so self-contained that any attempt to change it feels like trying to turn a ship the size of a continent. Marcus learned to keep his head down early. Not just because of the guards, but because of the inmates too. Angola houses men convicted of some of the most serious offenses in the country. According to state data, a significant percentage are serving life without parole. As Marcus put it, "You don't make friends here. You make agreements." The weight of the sentence. There's a detail that comes up in nearly every Angola story, the life sentence. In many prisons, life doesn't always mean life. There might be parole hearings, sentence reductions, credits for good behavior. But at Angola, according to Louisiana sentencing laws and public records, more than 70% of inmates are serving life without parole. That means they will die there. State lawmakers and prosecutors argue that these sentences are reserved for the most serious crimes. Critics argue the system is overly harsh and disproportionately affects certain demographics, observations supported by decades of public reporting and criminal justice analyses. Marcus wasn't serving life without parole, but he was serving long enough that the difference felt theoretical. And that's something many former inmates talk about, a sense of suspended time. Angola doesn't just hold you, Marcus said. It swallows your future. He explained that every inmate had two clocks. The one on the wall, and the one in your chest. And only one of them ever stopped. The violence nobody talks about. Officially, Angola is safer now than it was decades ago, according to state audits and corrections reports. The prison's most violent era, the 1970s and 80s, saw levels of brutality, stabbings, and assaults that drew national attention. But former inmates claim violence still exists in pockets, sometimes hidden, sometimes ignored. According to news investigations, inmate-on-inmate assaults and allegations of abuse have been documented for years, though the rate and nature of incidents vary and are often contested by officials. Marcus described it like this. Some days felt normal. Other days, you could feel something coming in the air. But you never knew what. He said the dormitories were the most unpredictable. That's where tensions boiled. Arguments over food. Over debts. Over things so small that people on the outside would never understand. It wasn't the violence itself that haunted him. It was the randomness. You don't get to choose your enemies here, he said. They choose you. The guard towers. Angola has more than a dozen guard towers, tall, skeletal structures that loom over the land. Guards carry rifles. They watch the fields. They watch the gates. They watch the men. According to public records and state training manuals, the towers exist primarily for perimeter security and field supervision. But former inmates say the psychological impact was equal to the practical one. You could feel the eyes on you, Marcus said. Even when you couldn't see them. There's something unsettling about that level of constant observation. Something dehumanizing. Something that gets inside your head. And that's part of the Angola story too. Not just the violence. Not just the labor. But the unrelenting pressure, the sense that every step you take belongs to someone else. The farm line. Marcus's first assignment was field labor. He didn't ask for it. He didn't volunteer. He just woke up one morning to a guard shouting names, and his was one of them. According to state policies, inmates are assigned to work programs based on classification and behavior. But former inmates claim there is little room for refusal, especially for those with lower custody rankings, claims the department has historically denied. The work was backbreaking. Hot. Relentless. He spent hours bending and lifting and cutting and hauling. The guards on horseback moved slowly across the rows. Quiet. Watchful. Impersonal. Marcus said the horses bothered him the most. Not the guards. The horses. They made everything feel old, he said. Like nothing ever changed here. He wasn't wrong. The slow descent into routine. After a few months, Marcus noticed something strange. He had stopped thinking about the outside world. Not entirely. Not consciously. But something inside him had shifted. His days blurred. The field. The dorm. The mess hall. The inspections. The shouts. The silence. Time moved differently in Angola. Not in a straight line, but in a circle. You start to think the world out there is the dream, he said. And this place, this is the part that's real. That's one of the most common observations recorded in interviews about long-term incarceration, the psychological drift. The way the mind adapts. The way a new normal develops even when that normal is built on confinement. Marcus wasn't immune. Nobody is. The stories of the old-timers. There were men at Angola who had been there for decades. Names lost to time. Faces worn by sun and stress and routine. Men who had arrived during an entirely different era of the prison's history. Some of these men became unofficial historians, keepers of memory. They passed down stories like artifacts. Stories about the old warden regimes. The violence in the 1970s. The racial tensions. The hunger strikes. The lawsuits. The Angola 3, a group of inmates who spent decades in solitary confinement, according to court filings and extensive news coverage. Marcus listened. Everyone did. Because in a place built on silence, stories were the closest thing to freedom. But the stories weren't comforting. They weren't nostalgic. They were warnings. Angola remembers, one old-timer said. And it makes sure you remember too. The unspoken truth. Here's the thing most people don't understand about places like Angola. It's not just the crimes that define the men inside. It's the environment. According to psychological studies on long-term incarceration, environments of extreme control and isolation can shape behavior, identity, and mental health. And Angola, with its history, its scale, its isolation, is a world unto itself. A world built on routine. Built on survival. Built on a past that casts a shadow over every inch of land. Marcus survived his first year. Barely. But survival wasn't the end of the story. It was just the threshold. Because Angola wasn't done with him. The day the walls snapped. If Angola was a slow burn, a long, smothering pressure that tightened around him and one day at a time, Attica was the opposite. Attica was a flashpoint. An eruption. A prison built like a fortress and remembered like a battlefield. The name alone carries weight. Attica Correctional Facility, according to New York State records, sits in the rural northwest corner of the state. Cold winters. Gray walls. Guard towers that seem to press down on you. It's a place most Americans only know from one thing: the riot. The 1971 uprising. One of the deadliest prison riots in U.S. history. A moment that split the country, shocked the world, and exposed fractures that had been growing invisible beneath the surface. For the men who were there, it wasn't history. It was survival. For the men who arrived later, like our composite narrator Marcus, it was legacy. A memory that lingered in the gates themselves. Because Attica isn't just a prison. It is a prison that remembers. And the walls. If you listen long enough, some men swear they can still hear the aftershocks. A cold arrival. Marcus didn't go directly from Angola to Attica. This isn't a story about transfers or case details. His experiences are a composite, built from verified accounts of inmates who served in both the South and Northeast. But he described the contrast the same way many others have. Angola tried to break your body, he said. Attica went straight for your mind. It began the moment he stepped off the transport van. The air was cold. Sharp. The kind of cold that cuts straight through prison uniforms not designed for weather, only compliance. According to New York State climate records, winter temperatures in the Attica region can drop below freezing, and inmates interviewed in news investigations have long described harsh, uncomfortable winters. Marcus exhaled, watching his breath rise like smoke into the gray morning air. Angola had heat and humidity that clung to the skin. Attica had winter that bit. And the silence. That was the first thing he noticed. Not the absence of sound. Attica had plenty of noise inside. But the silence of the buildings. The silence of the walls. Massive stone blocks rising like something carved out of a mountain. Angola felt like a country. Attica felt like a castle. A castle built for war. The shadow of 1971. You cannot understand Attica without understanding 1971. According to official investigations, the uprising began on September 9, 1971, when inmates seized control of portions of the facility, taking hostages and demanding better living conditions, political rights, and protections from abuse. The standoff lasted 4 days. Negotiations were tense, televised, and nationally controversial. It ended when law enforcement stormed the yard in a hail of gunfire. Dozens of inmates and hostages were killed, according to the final state report. Multiple sources, journalists, historians, court filings, have documented the brutality of the retaking, the chaos, and the long-term fallout that shaped decades of prison reforms. But Marcus. He didn't learn any of that from books. He learned it the same way inmates had for 50 years, from the stories whispered at night, in bunks, in corridors, in the corners where men spoke in low voices so guards couldn't hear. Some inmates treated 1971 like a warning. Others treated it like a wound. Some still carried the trauma in their eyes. Everything here, one inmate told Marcus, every rule, every search, every look from a guard, everything is because of what happened in 71. That was the thing about Attica. The riot wasn't an event. It was an identity. And everyone, inmates, guards, administrators, was living in its aftermath. Routine with an edge. Every prison has a rhythm. Attica's rhythm was sharp. Mechanical. Predictable on paper, unpredictable in reality. Wake up. Count. Breakfast. Search. Work detail. Search again. Yard time. Count. Lock in. Officially, the facility runs like a tightly structured correctional institution. But the details, the way counts were done, the way voices carried through the hallways, the way doors slammed with a violence that made men flinch, those details shaped the culture. Marcus noticed immediately that Attica had a different energy than Angola. Where Angola was sprawling and open, Attica was compressed. Dense. The cell blocks rose like industrial canyons, 5 tiers high, with metal walkways that vibrated under the weight of footsteps. Inmates described the sound of those steps as omnipresent, guards above you, inmates below you, everyone always moving. It created a constant tension. A sense that something could happen at any moment. According to public investigations and journalistic reports spanning decades, Attica has long struggled with complaints of harsh conditions, confrontations between guards and inmates, and episodes of violence, issues often disputed, denied, or countered by corrections officials. Marcus felt all of that in the air. A pressure he didn't have words for at first. Later, he found the words. Angola threatened your body. Attica threatened your sanity. The C-block corridor. There are places in a prison that hold power simply because of what has happened there. C-block was one of those places. C-block is one of the largest enclosed cell blocks in the world, according to physical facility records. It's long, narrow, dim metal doors on both sides. Echoes that never quite fade. It's a place where tension collects. Marcus was assigned there during his first weeks. The first morning he walked down that corridor, he heard the sound, a specific Attica sound. A metallic crack that echoed through the block whenever a cell door opened or closed. It was sharp, violently loud, and followed by the slam of steel meeting steel. Even the air felt different inside C-block. Thicker. Heavier. Men leaned against bars, watching newcomers the way fishermen watch the water. No expressions. Just measuring. Calculating. Marcus kept his eyes forward. Not out of fear, out of instinct. Attica tests you, a long-time inmate told him later. Every hallway. Every glance. Everything's a question. You better answer right. Marcus didn't speak. He didn't nod. He just walked. Sometimes silence is the only correct answer. The politics of survival. Every prison has politics, unspoken rules, alliances, boundaries. Angola's politics were shaped by labor fields, lifers, and decades of rural southern culture. Attica's politics were shaped by trauma. After 1971, according to multiple investigations, racial tensions, distrust between staff and inmates, and clashing factions remained deeply embedded. Over the decades, reforms attempted to reduce some of the worst conditions, but the memories lingered. Marcus learned quickly. At Attica, strength was currency. Respect was armor. Trust was rare. He didn't join anyone. Didn't align with any group. Didn't seek protection. His strategy was simple. Know everyone. Belong to no one. He played chess in the yard with old-timers. He worked in the kitchen where he could overhear conversations. He kept to routines so predictable they became invisible. And still, the danger found him anyway. The day the tension broke. It was a Tuesday. Cold. Gray. Exactly the kind of morning that Attica seemed built for. Marcus was working a kitchen shift, one of the safer details on paper. According to state job assignments, kitchen duty is considered medium risk. But inmates interviewed over the years have said the kitchen was also where grudges were settled. Where knives, real or improvised, were closest at hand. The argument started small. A disagreement between two men who had probably been circling each other for months. Marcus didn't know their history. Didn't care. But everyone around them did. That's how prison fights often begin, not out of anger, but inevitability. Marcus was rinsing trays when he heard the shift in tone. It wasn't the words, it was the silence that followed them. A sudden vacuum. The kind that tells you something is about to happen. One of the men said something low and final. The other responded with a movement, quick, sharp, that made the room erupt. A table slammed. Metal clattered. Someone shouted. Someone else backed away. In seconds, guards stormed in. Orders shouted. Bodies forced to the ground. The kind of chaos that leaves your heart pounding long after the floor stops shaking. Marcus didn't move. Didn't look. Didn't blink. Moments like that teach you something. Danger isn't always personal. Sometimes it's environmental, a kind of weather pattern you learn to predict. When the incident was over, guards cuffed the two men and dragged them out. According to news reports, internal investigations into inmate altercations are standard procedure, though results often vary and details remain confidential. But what mattered to Marcus wasn't the fight. It was the look on the face of one of the guards, a look that said, "This place is still a spark away from 1971. The guards of Attica." It's impossible to tell a story about Attica without acknowledging the staff who work there. Guards at Attica have one of the most dangerous jobs in the U.S. corrections system, according to state safety reports. They work long shifts, manage volatile populations, and carry the weight of the facility's legacy on their shoulders. Many come from families who have worked at Attica for generations. For them, the prison is not just an employer, it's a community. Marcus noticed two types of guards. Type 1. Professional. Firm but fair. Focused on procedure. The kind who keep their distance but don't provoke without cause. Type 2. Brittle. On edge. Carrying anger that didn't start with him but ended up aimed at whoever crossed their path. According to decades of public investigations and journalism, Attica has faced allegations of excessive force, retaliation, and staff misconduct, claims officials have often denied or disputed. But the tension between staff and inmates is well documented. Marcus saw it in the eyes of the guards who watched too closely. The ones whose hands hovered near batons when voices rose. The ones who carried the memory of the uprising like a scar. Attica wasn't just haunted for the inmates. It was haunted for the staff too. The cellmate. Marcus didn't choose his cellmate. Nobody chooses their cellmate at Attica. His was a quiet man, older, thin, eyes sharp and alert. We'll call him Lawson, a composite character drawn from multiple public inmate accounts used for narrative purposes. Lawson had served more than 20 years. Spent time in multiple facilities. Seen things he never talked about directly. But he talked about Attica. Not the riot, he was too young for that. But the aftermath. According to Lawson, Attica wasn't dangerous because of any one group, any one policy, any one moment. It was dangerous because it had memory. Every confrontation. Every grievance. Every loss. They all lingered in the air. Lawson once told Marcus, "You think the riot is ancient history? Around here, it's yesterday." And Marcus believed him. Night in Attica. If daytime in Attica was tense, nighttime was worse. During count time, the block went quiet, a theatrical, unnatural quiet. Footsteps echoed. Keys jingled. Guards moved with a rhythm trained into them over decades. After count, the noises returned. Low conversations. Arguments. Whispers. Metal clanging from a cell 2 tiers down. But the sound that rattled Marcus most was the nighttime scream. Every prison has them, but something about Attica's seemed sharper. More desperate. Sometimes a bad dream. Sometimes a panic attack. Sometimes something worse. Marcus never asked. In prison, you don't ask about screams. You let them exist. The old guard tower. There was one tower in Attica that inmates said was cursed. Not literally, but historically. It had been used during the 1971 uprising, according to facility maps and public reports. Some said shots were fired from it. Others said hostages were once held nearby. Details varied. Memories blurred. Facts mixed with survivor stories and the haze of trauma. Marcus didn't believe the stories, he was too grounded for superstition. But he did believe in atmosphere. And the tower had atmosphere. Every time he passed it during yard movement, he felt the cold in his bones deepen. As if the tower itself carried a weight no one could shake. Broken places remember broken things, Lawson once told him. Marcus thought that was melodramatic. But later, he wasn't so sure. The incident that changed everything. It wasn't a riot. Not a stabbing. Not a protest. Not anything that would make headlines. It was something small. Personal. Insignificant to everyone except the men it happened to. Marcus heard it before he saw it, raised voices echoing down the gallery. A guard shouting for someone to step back. Metal clanging. A struggle. A door slamming. Officially, incidents like this are reported in internal logs, but those logs aren't public. What we present here is a composite based on numerous public allegations, court testimonies, and inmate interviews. The specifics are fictionalized and anonymized for privacy. Here's what Marcus described. A young inmate, barely 20, was being pulled from his cell. He looked terrified. Not angry. Not aggressive. Terrified. Marcus didn't know what the kid had done. Didn't know what he was accused of. Didn't know what came next. But he knew the look. He'd seen it in Angola. Fear that goes beyond immediate danger. Fear of a system bigger than any individual. The sounds echoed through the block long after the guards left. And that was the moment Attica changed for Marcus. Because that was the moment he realized something important. In Angola, cruelty was environmental. In Attica, it was institutional memory. Pain passed down like inheritance. Fear carried by the walls themselves. The breaking point. Marcus didn't break, but he bent, slowly, over months. Attica had a way of wearing a man down, not with violence, but with pressure. Constant. Relentless. A psychological tightening. It was the lights that never fully dimmed. The announcements blaring through speakers. The shakedowns at unpredictable hours. The screams. The claustrophobia. The feeling that the riot had never ended, only paused. Some men lashed out. Some withdrew. Some became numb. Marcus adapted. He found routines. Work shifts. Conversations. Moments of normalcy carved from abnormal circumstances. But one truth never left him. Angola tried to break your body. Attica tried to break your spirit. And surviving both put a weight on a man's soul that no release date could ever undo. The unseen cost. There was a psychologist who visited the blocks weekly, a real, verified practice in New York correctional facilities. We'll call her Dr. Hartman, a composite pseudonym. She spoke with men through tiny office windows. Asked questions. Listened. Took notes. Marcus didn't go to her at first. Men rarely volunteered. Not out of pride, out of mistrust. But Attica has a way of pushing you toward the people you least expect. When he finally sat across from her, he didn't talk about the fights. Or the guards. Or the tension. He talked about the dreams. Dreams of Angola's fields. Dreams of Attica's towers. Dreams where he couldn't tell which prison he was still in. Dr. Hartman didn't push. Didn't judge. Didn't give speeches. She just said, "These places change people." Marcus didn't respond. Didn't need to. The truth was obvious. A prison that taught him to see. Despite everything, Attica taught Marcus something Angola never did. How to observe. How to read a room. How to anticipate danger. How to understand the tension between past and present. Because Angola showed him suffering. But Attica taught him the systems behind it. Why people crack. Why institutions fail. Why trauma spreads like smoke. He learned that the deadliest prisons aren't just dangerous because of violence. But because of history. Because of unresolved conflict. Because of wounds the system refuses to heal. And that knowledge would follow him long after Attica faded behind him. End of Chapter 2. When you're ready for Chapter 3, another 2,500 plus words, just say continue. You said. Start Chapter 3, minimum of 2,500 plus words /. ChatGPT said. Absolutely, here is Chapter 3, 2,500 plus words minimum, pure narrative, cinematic, tense, grounded in real history and public reporting, with only ethical fictionalization. No stage directions. No summaries. Just story. Chapter 3, The Long Echo. Marcus used to think trauma was like a wound. Something sharp, something immediate, something that struck hard and left its mark. But after surviving both Angola and Attica, two prisons built 1,000 miles apart but connected by a kind of brutal spiritual architecture, he understood trauma differently. It wasn't just a wound. It was an echo. Long after the violence ended, long after the shouts faded, long after the metal doors slammed shut for the final time, the echo remained. In memories. In habits. In reflexes you couldn't explain to anyone who hadn't been behind the walls. Some nights, long after the world went quiet, Marcus swore he could hear Angola's fields. The cicadas. The boots on dirt. The distant crack of a tower rifle being loaded. Other nights, it was Attica's steel that haunted him, the metallic shriek of the C-block gates, the muffled screams in the dark, the heavy footsteps of guards whose silhouettes never looked human in the half-light. But the strangest part wasn't that he remembered them. It was that his mind blended them together. As if both prisons were part of the same sentence. The same story. The same long echo. And Chapter 3 begins with a question Marcus asked himself over and over again. What happens to a man when the echo becomes louder than the memory itself? The hearing. The parole board room was small. Smaller than Marcus expected. It was colder too, the kind of cold that didn't come from weather, but from bureaucracy. A wall clock ticked in sharp, punctuated beats. A cheap fluorescent light flickered overhead. And 3 chairs faced him, each positioned with a deliberate sense of hierarchy. The panel. The evaluators. The judges of a man's future. Marcus had sat across from powerful people before, wardens, disciplinary officers, counselors, investigators. But this felt different. Those people managed his present. These 3 strangers held his future. The woman at the center, the chair of the panel, flipped casually through his file, the paperwork a patchwork of public records, sentencing documents, behavioral logs, educational certificates, incident reports, and psychological evaluations. None of Angola was in there, not officially. Most of Angola's pain never made it onto paper. Attica, though. Attica always left paperwork. The chairwoman adjusted her glasses, scanning his file with the precise, practiced expression of someone who had seen thousands of men sit exactly where he was sitting. Finally, she spoke. Mr. R., your institutional record is unusual. Marcus held still. That's one word for it, he said quietly. The board didn't smile. She continued. Your disciplinary history is minimal. Your program participation is excellent. You earned your GED, completed vocational training, and your instructors rate you highly. But. She tapped the file. A single page. His psychological evaluation. But your evaluator notes symptoms consistent with institutional PTSD. Hypervigilance. Sleep disturbances. Dissociative episodes. Anger suppression. Marcus swallowed. I've worked on all that. I'm sure you have, the chairwoman said, not unkindly. Another board member spoke, an older man with a voice like sandpaper. You served years in 2 of the most dangerous prisons in the country. Angola and Attica have broken stronger men than you. We're not questioning your effort. We're questioning your readiness. Marcus nodded. He'd expected that. They weren't just judging him. They were judging the echo. One last question, the chairwoman said. What will you do if we release you? Marcus answered honestly. I don't know. The board exchanged a look. A small one. But devastating. Because in their world, a man without a plan was a man still chained to the past. The hearing ended. They dismissed him. He was escorted out. He didn't know it then, but that was the moment everything began to unravel, not because of their decision, but because of what he felt walking out of that room. Fear. Not of prison. But of freedom. A world that moved on. Weeks later, Marcus was walking through a neighborhood he'd never seen before, not free, not quite, but transitioning through a re-entry program intended to prepare long-term inmates for the outside world. The houses looked normal. Bright. Colorful. Real. Cars passed by with music playing so loud he could feel the bass in his chest. People walked dogs. Kids skateboarded. Neighbors carried groceries from their trunks to their front doors. And Marcus felt like a ghost. Everything was too fast. Too loud. Too open. Nobody was watching him, but he felt watched. No towers. No rifles. No guards. But the sensation wouldn't leave. He crossed the street, instinct forcing him to scan both directions even though the road was empty. Hypervigilance, the counselor had called it. The echo. He passed a construction site. A metal gate slammed in the wind. Marcus froze. Attica. C-block. The metal shriek. The screams. The lockdown. A construction worker glanced at him. You good, man? Marcus nodded. Yeah. Sorry. Just, loud. The worker shrugged. It's a city. Everything's loud. Marcus kept walking. He felt like he'd stepped into a world that had been playing for years without him, a movie that continued long after he'd exited the theater. And now he was trying to find his seat again. But the room was dark. And the film had changed. The program. The reentry center was part halfway house, part therapy clinic, part education hub. According to public records, many states have invested in similar transitional programs designed to reduce recidivism, offer mental health support, and provide a structured path for reintegration. Marcus appreciated that. In theory. In practice, the walls felt too close. He sat in group therapy, a circle of plastic chairs occupied by men from every possible background, each carrying his own kind of echo. There was a man who'd spent 15 years in a supermax. Another who'd been homeless before prison and was terrified of going back. Another who couldn't remember how to use a phone without buttons. When it was Marcus's turn to talk, he hesitated. He always hesitated. Finally he said, "I don't know who I'm supposed to be out here." The counselor nodded. "That's normal. It doesn't feel normal. Because you survived environments that aren't normal." Marcus didn't argue. She was right. But knowing that didn't make the echo quieter. The nightmares. The dreams came back stronger after release. He dreamed he was back in Angola's fields, the heat so suffocating it felt alive. Guards on horseback circling the rows. The sound of labor. The crack of a rifle chambering around. Then the dream would shift without warning, he'd be in Attica. Cold. Steel everywhere. Screams echoing through the tears. Concrete that never warmed. The tower watching like a hungry god. Sometimes both dreams overlapped, Angola's horses running through Attica's corridors. Attica's towers rising from Angola's sugarcane fields. The human brain isn't designed for that kind of overlap. Not in waking life. Not in sleep. He would wake drenched in sweat, heart pounding, unsure of where he was. One night, he woke shouting. The staff rushed in. "You're safe," they said. "You're not inside anymore." It was just a nightmare. But Marcus knew the truth. Nothing about those dreams was just anything. They were memories. Raw and unresolved. The echo, refusing to fade. The question no one asked. In all the therapy sessions, all the evaluations, all the group meetings, no one ever asked Marcus the question that mattered most. What happened to your sense of time? People asked how he felt. What he feared. What he planned. How he slept. Whether he needed medication. What his goals were. But time was the one thing prison damaged beyond repair. In Angola, days were endless stretches of labor. Weeks melted together in the heat. Months passed without progress. Years slipped by quietly. In Attica, time snapped like a rubber band, unpredictable, jarring. Moments of calm shattered by sudden lockdowns. Routine interrupted by violence. Sleep interrupted by screams. Prison time was circular. Repetitive. A loop. Outside time was linear. Forward. Fast. And Marcus wasn't ready for the acceleration. Every day he felt like he was running behind a world that never slowed down to let him catch up. He once sat on a bench for nearly an hour just watching cars move past, hypnotized by the speed. By the freedom. By the casualness of motion. A bus rolled by with an advertisement on the side. A movie release date. A clever tagline. And Marcus realized something strange. He didn't understand the joke. Didn't recognize the celebrities. Didn't know the reference. It wasn't just time he'd lost. It was context. The men who returned. One afternoon, a man arrived at the center. Late 40s. Quiet. Wearing clothes that didn't quite fit. Marcus recognized the look, the small, uncertain steps of someone freshly released from decades inside. Someone trying to shrink themselves into invisibility. They sat together at lunch. The man, whom we'll call Harrison, an ethically fictionalized composite of multiple public accounts, picked at his food. You were at Angola, right? He asked suddenly. Marcus nodded. You too. Harrison gave a humorless laugh. I left that place, and I swear the soil stayed on my boots. They talked for over an hour. About Angola's fields. The heat. The labor. The old stories. The guards who rode horseback like something out of another century. Then Harrison lowered his voice. But Attica. He paused. Attica gets into your head differently. Marcus felt his spine stiffen. You were there too. 10 years, Harrison said quietly. C-block. Marcus felt it, a sudden, immediate connection. Not friendship. Not camaraderie. Recognition. Two men shaped by the same echo. We don't come out as ourselves. They walked together after lunch, and Harrison said something Marcus never forgot. We don't come out as ourselves. Not after places like that. We come out as whoever we had to become to survive. Marcus stopped walking. That hit too close. Harrison kept going. In Angola, I became someone who didn't speak unless spoken to. In Attica, I became someone who never blinked first. What about now? Marcus asked. Harrison shrugged. Now I'm supposed to be someone new. But nobody tells you how to kill the old versions. He turned. Looked Marcus dead in the eye. You feel it too. Don't you? Marcus didn't answer. He didn't have to. Learned behaviors. Over the next weeks, Marcus noticed things. He couldn't sit with his back facing a door. He couldn't handle sudden loud noises. He couldn't stand being in crowded stores, too many angles, too many threats, too many shadows. One afternoon, he found himself in a grocery aisle when a kid's balloon popped. He dropped to one knee before he even realized what he was doing. A woman gasped. Sir? Are you okay? Marcus forced a smile. Just startled. But he wasn't startled. He was triggered. A sound like that in Attica would have meant lockdown. In Angola, it would have meant a rifle firing into the air. In both prisons, it meant danger. Out here, it meant nothing. But his body didn't understand nothing. His body only understood survival. The report. One morning, the counselor called him in. I got your psychological progress evaluation, she said. Marcus braced himself. You're doing better, she continued. But better isn't the same as healed. He nodded. She set the report on the table. You've survived 2 institutions documented for decades as exceptionally harsh environments. Angola and Attica have been the subject of federal lawsuits, civil rights investigations, media exposés, and legislative reviews. No one walks away from that unmarked. Marcus stared at the report. The counselor leaned back. Tell me what you think healing looks like for you. He hesitated. Finally. Silence. The good kind. She smiled sadly. Then that's where we start. The visit to the past. Part of the re-entry program involved confronting one's history, not to relive it, but to understand it. To contextualize trauma. To reclaim narrative. So they visited an exhibit, a museum display on Angola and Attica, based entirely on public records, historical documents, and investigative reporting. Marcus walked slowly. Photos of Angola's early chain gangs. Images of the plantation-era structures. Testimonies from inmates who lived through the violent decades. He paused at a photo of a guard tower rising over a field. An image from the 1950s. It looked exactly like the tower he remembered. Then they turned a corner, and the Attica section began. The riot. The hostages. The tear gas. The gunfire. The aftermath. Marcus felt his hands curl into fists. Not from anger, from memory. He stared at a black and white photo of C-block. Rows of cells. Metal catwalks. Guards above and below. He could hear it in his head, the slams, the shouts, the echoes. A museum visitor leaned toward a friend and whispered. It looks like a movie set. Marcus's jaw clenched. Harrison, standing beside him, said quietly. Movies end. That place doesn't. The conversation that broke the echo. Later that night, Marcus couldn't sleep. The images wouldn't leave his mind. He found Harrison sitting outside on the center's patio. You all right? Harrison asked. No. Harrison nodded. Good. Means you're processing. Marcus sat down beside him. For a long time, they didn't speak. Finally, Marcus said. What if I'm never normal again? Harrison laughed softly. Normal isn't our goal. What is? Functional. Marcus frowned. That's it. That's everything. Harrison looked up at the sky. When I first got out, I kept trying to go back to who I was before prison. But that man's gone. Angola took some of him. Attica took the rest. Marcus closed his eyes. Harrison continued. Now I'm learning something important. Survival isn't the same as living. Angola taught me one. Attica taught me the other. Now I'm trying to figure out what I want the third act to be. Marcus opened his eyes. The third act. Harrison nodded. This. Right here. Who we become after the echo. The first real breath. A week later, something strange happened. Marcus woke up one morning, and the world felt a little quieter. Not silent. Not peaceful. But quieter. The echoes weren't gone, but they weren't drowning him anymore. He ate breakfast. Walked outside. Felt the sun on his face. For the first time, he didn't brace for something to go wrong. He sat on the steps and took a slow breath. A real one. A free one. And for that single moment, Angola and Attica weren't prisons in his mind. They were just places. Chapters. Shadows behind him. The echo dimmed. Not gone. Not healed. But quieter. And that was enough. For now. The price of survival. The counselors at the re-entry center called it transition. The parole board called it re-entry. The courts called it reintegration. Marcus called it the space between worlds. Not prison. Not freedom. Just between. Some men passed through that space like they were waking up from a long sleep, blinking, disoriented, adjusting to the light. Others wandered it like ghosts, unsure whether life outside meant rebirth or another kind of sentence. But Marcus. He inhabited it. Because deep down, he knew something most people never consider. Freedom is its own kind of test. And not everyone passes it. The first day out. Marcus stepped out of the re-entry center on a crisp morning that didn't feel real. The sky overhead looked too wide, a ceiling too big. Clouds floated without pattern or schedule. Cars moved freely. The air tasted like possibility and danger braided together. He carried everything he owned in a single duffel bag. A few clothes. A notebook they'd encouraged him to write in. A set of toiletries. A packet of pamphlets about employment programs and mental health resources. A prepaid phone he still wasn't comfortable using. A volunteer offered him a ride to the city bus stop. Marcus accepted, though every instinct told him not to get into cars he didn't control. Not to trust people he didn't know. But this was the new world. The world where instincts needed retraining. The car ride was quiet. The volunteer tried to make small talk. Marcus answered politely, but his mind raced. Every turn of the road reminded him of Angola's farm lines. Every stoplight reminded him of Attica's counts. Every passing police car made his breath tighten without warning. The volunteer said, "You'll do great out here." Marcus nodded. But inside he thought. You have no idea what I'm coming back from. The apartment. His new apartment was small, a single room with a kitchenette, a bathroom barely large enough to turn around in, and a window that faced an alleyway with trash cans lined like silent sentries. To anyone else, it might have looked depressing. To Marcus, it looked like a fortress of his own. No cellmate. No guards. No searches. No lights snapping on at random hours. Just quiet. He dropped his duffel bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed. The springs creaked under his weight. For the longest time, he didn't move. Didn't unpack. Didn't explore. He just sat there. Listening. There were sounds, the hum of a refrigerator, a car door slamming in the distance, the faint metallic groan of the fire escape shifting in the wind. But they were ordinary sounds. Civilian sounds. And yet his body remained tense. Hands clenched. Shoulders tight. Because when you've lived in places like Angola and Attica, places with history so violent they practically vibrate, quiet doesn't feel safe. Quiet means waiting. Quiet means watching. Quiet means the moment right before a lockdown announcement or a fight that breaks out without warning. But this quiet. This was something else. A space. A pause. A breath. He lay down on the bed, slowly, like someone learning a new language. For the first time in years, he wasn't sleeping under fluorescent lights. And yet he didn't sleep. Not that night. Not for days. Freedom has its own insomnia. The job hunt. Most newly released inmates struggle with employment, a fact widely documented in criminal justice studies and reentry statistics. Background checks. Gaps in work history. Stigma. All of it conspires to make the job hunt feel impossible. Marcus knew this. He'd heard it 1,000 times in the center. What he didn't expect was how foreign everything felt. He walked into a fast food restaurant one morning, resume in hand, a resume built from prison labor programs, GED classes, vocational training certifications. All real. All valid. All public. The manager asked simple questions. Do you have experience working under pressure? What are your strengths? What would you bring to our team? Marcus answered honestly. Yes. I'm consistent. I know how to follow routine. The manager nodded politely, but Marcus could feel the subtext. Not judged. Not dismissed. But weighed. And he knew the weight of his past tipped the scale heavily. He filled out the application anyway. And he kept filling them out. Day after day. Factories. Warehouses. Cleaning companies. Small businesses. Some places smiled. Others frowned. A few avoided eye contact altogether. He wasn't angry. He didn't blame them. He just felt the echo again. Angola taught him labor. Attica taught him vigilance. But neither taught him how to belong. The grocery store incident. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Marcus was in a grocery store, the kind with soft lighting, a bakery by the entrance, an aisle so narrow they forced strangers to pass close enough to smell each other's soap. He hated it. His counselor told him exposure therapy would help. Slowly, gradually, gently. But nothing in Angola or Attica ever prepared him for a world where strangers brushed past without knowing how dangerous that felt. He was grabbing a carton of eggs when someone behind him said loudly, "Hey, move up." It was nothing. A simple request. An impatient shopper. But Marcus's body reacted before his brain could catch up. He spun fast. Too fast. Hands up. Posture defensive. The men stepped back, startled. Whoa, I just need to get through. Marcus blinked. Realized what he'd done. Lowered his hands immediately. Sorry, he whispered. I'm sorry. The men shrugged and pushed past him. But Marcus couldn't shake the shame. The reflex. The involuntary stance he'd taken, a stance shaped by years of institutional survival. He abandoned his cart. Walked out of the store. Sat on the curb with his head in his hands. For the first time since release, he cried. Not because of anger. Not because of fear. Because he didn't know how to be normal. Harrison's call. That night, Marcus's phone rang. It was Harrison, the man from the reentry center, the one who'd served time in both Angola and Attica. You okay? Harrison asked. Marcus didn't answer at first. Harrison sighed. I felt it too, you know. When I got out. The world felt too fast, too loud, too close. Marcus closed his eyes. I did something stupid today. Let me guess, Harrison said. Someone startled you. Reflex kicked in. You reacted like you were still inside. Marcus's voice cracked. That obvious? To someone like me? Yes. Harrison's tone softened. Listen, Marcus. We survived places built to break men. Angola's fields. Attica's steel. You think we walk away from that without scars? Without reflexes? Without instincts that saved us inside but betray us outside? Marcus didn't respond. Stop trying to be normal, Harrison said. Try to be aware. Try to be patient. Try to be forgiving. That's enough. The past that wouldn't stay buried. One afternoon, Marcus sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the wall. A blank wall. Not a cinderblock wall. Not a graffiti-scratched prison wall. A simple painted wall. His mind pulled him back anyway. He remembered Angola's fields, the endless rows, the heat rising in shimmering waves, the guards on horseback. The feeling of the sun beating down like judgment. He remembered Attica's C-block, the cold that seeped into bones, the metallic shriek of doors, the tension that vibrated through every movement. He remembered the men who didn't survive. The ones who broke. The ones who vanished into solitary confinement. The ones whose names were whispered and then forgotten. The memories came in flashes, sharp, raw, uninvited. His counselor once said trauma isn't a monster hiding under the bed, it's a shadow that walks with you. But Marcus felt it differently. Trauma was a map. And Angola and Attica were two countries he could never fully emigrate from. He stood. Paced the room. Sat back down. He felt the walls closing in, even though they weren't. He felt the past rising, even though it wasn't here. He felt the echo growing louder. He grabbed his jacket and walked out of the apartment. Sometimes movement was the only way to outrun memory. The bridge. Every city has a place where you can see everything, the skyline, the water, the horizon. Marcus found a bridge like that. He stood at the railing as cars sped by behind him, the river churning below like a restless animal. He watched the water move, constantly flowing, never holding still. He wondered what it would feel like to be that unbound. A stranger approached. Not threatening. Not dangerous. Just curious. You good? The man asked. Marcus nodded slowly. Yeah. Just thinking. The man shrugged and walked on. And Marcus realized something profound. Strangers didn't see a prisoner. They saw a man. A quiet man. A tired man. But a man. The world didn't know his story. The world didn't carry his echo. And that was freedom. Not the absence of walls. Not the presence of choices. But the chance to be nobody. To be invisible. To be unremarkable. To exist without being watched. He stayed on the bridge until the sun set. Colors burned across the sky like a slow explosion. For the first time, he saw something beautiful and didn't feel guilty. Didn't feel unworthy. Didn't feel trapped by memory. He just felt present. The letter. Weeks passed. Slowly. But something shifted inside him. He began journaling, not because someone told him to, but because the words needed somewhere to live besides his head. He wrote about Angola's fields. Attica's towers. The men he'd known. The pain he carried. The hope he wasn't ready to admit. One day, he wrote a sentence he stared at for a long time. I survived the worst places in America. Maybe I can survive freedom too. He folded the page. Slipped it into an envelope. Addressed it to Harrison. Inside he wrote. If you ever feel the echo coming back, call me. We survived the first 2 chapters together. Maybe we can survive the third as well. He mailed it. And for the first time, felt connected instead of alone. The choice. One night, Marcus sat in his apartment, lights dimmed, breeze drifting through the half-open window. He thought about Angola, the sun so hot it erased the horizon. He thought about Attica, the cold so sharp it carved men from stone. He thought about the men still inside, men whose stories would never be told. He reached for his notebook. And he began writing their stories. Not names. Not specifics. Not accusations. Just experiences. Truths allowed by public record and trauma's memory. Stories of survival. Stories of endurance. Stories of men the world had forgotten. He didn't know if anyone would ever read them. But writing them felt like reclaiming something, like pulling pieces of himself out of the echo and placing them gently onto the page. He wrote for hours. Then days. Then weeks. Writing became his silence. His breath. His healing. The final realization. Months passed. Marcus got a steady job at a packaging facility. He made friends, cautiously, slowly. He smiled more. Slept better. Started cooking again. Learned how to shop without panicking. Learned how to sit with his back to a door, sometimes. Learned how to walk down a crowded street without scanning every shadow. But the echo never fully died. And one day, he understood something that finally made peace possible. He didn't need the echo to disappear. He just needed to learn how to live with it. To turn it from a warning into wisdom. From fear into awareness. From pain into identity. Survival wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning. He wasn't the man he was before Angola. Or the man Attica tried to shape. He was something new. Someone rebuilt from the ruins. Someone forged in two of America's deadliest prisons, and still capable of walking freely into the future. He stood at his window that night, listening to the city breathe. And for the first time, he felt like he was breathing with it, not against it. The echo was still there. But now, it sounded less like trauma. And more like testimony. A rhythm he could walk with. A rhythm that didn't own him anymore. A rhythm that said, "You lived. You survived. You are still here."